Welcome to the Diversity Connector podcast, where we explore the rich tapestry of human experiences. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and together as we dive into conversations that bridge cultures, challenge stereotypes, and celebrate the unique perspectives each of us brings to the table. Each episode is a journey through stories and insights from a kaleidoscope of voices, each sharing their colorful narrative. At home, on the go, or just anywhere in between, you're now part of a community that values understanding, inclusivity, and the beauty of diversity. So plug in your headphones, get comfortable, and let's connect through the power of our shared stories. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on the Diversity Connector podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Diversity Connector. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating young woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Hi everyone, my name is Chloe Doras. I'm coming to you today from Halifax, Nova Scotia, but that's not where my story originated from. I'm originally from the Caribbean, from a small island called St. Kitts and Nevis, or also known as St. Christopher and Nevis. And I lived there for most of my life, born and raised, about 20 years until I immigrated to Canada. And that's where I am right now. So I came to Canada to essentially pursue my education, because oftentimes that's in the Caribbean, it's very limited. Individuals have to travel abroad or to neighboring islands to pursue higher education. So I made the decision to journey to Canada, sight unseen, never having seen Canada before, only in the media, travel to Canada. And I studied my undergraduate in international development studies at Dalhousie University. And that's where I am also right now, completing my master in public administration. I have been in Canada for about 9 years now, and it has been a very interesting experience, especially being a Black person, a woman of color, and also someone who can be labeled or categorized as a newcomer or immigrant. My experiences, particularly my social experiences, my cultural and lived experiences within the Caribbean, really, I guess, really shaped how I was able to settle into Canada. Because I came at a much older age, it was easy for me to settle into a new life, into a new routine. But my experiences, like I said, as a Black person were completely different, because when you make the transition from a country that's predominantly Black and then you come to a country that's predominantly white, it came with its own experiences. I have definitely had my challenges of recognizing that, yeah, I guess I'm not in Kansas anymore. I'm a Black person. I'm a woman. I stood out. And I think being from the Caribbean, that gave me a level of confidence, having to navigate certain systems that's not, at least what I was told, not really is expected from Black people here in North America or in Canada. So that often took people as a surprise. But for me, that was not someone, I was not willing to change who I was in order to fit into spaces. So much of my life here has been trying to navigate a system that wasn't essentially made for me, or I don't usually fit in just because of who I am. And I have to say, it has not been without its challenges. I have definitely experienced my own challenges in terms of I guess, individuals doubting you for who you are. I definitely have experiences where people doubt your intelligence, your competence, simply because of who you are. And that has been very interesting. But in my opinion, what they say is what doesn't kill you make you stronger. And as much as you often don't want to go through those experiences, it really informs how you navigate the rest of life. And for me right now, I've taken all those, bottled those up, taken the lessons that I needed to take from it. And now I'm transitioning into a career in specifically consultant, public service consultant. Been starting that in a couple of months, and that was particularly because for the latter of the last 2 years I spent working in the public service here in Nova Scotia, and I really liked doing it, public service work. I love the impact that government services can bring to marginalized communities, the most vulnerable communities, and that was a work that I want to carry on because I understood how it is important for people to live fulfilling lives. And oftentimes, the services, the products, the services that government provides, it is essential to a lot of people. And what works best is making sure their services support the needs of people, not just we're creating things for the sake of creating things, but actually delivering quality services that people need. So I decided that I wanted to take the parts of that and then transition it into consulting, where I want to be able to do public sector work, to have an impact, to be involved in social work in that type of area, but not essentially do it within the public service. So that's pretty much my life story in a few minutes.
Thank you for sharing your story with us today. It sounds to me like you transitioned from one amazing country and found yourself in a space where you were a minority, which is what a lot of us in the diaspora end up feeling. And what was the main culture shock when you first arrived in Canada? What was the one thing that really stood out for you?
Okay, very interesting question. It's funny that you asked that because the moment you did, something immediately popped into my mind. So I remember specifically, it was a few days after I arrived in Halifax, and I was living on residence. I was in my first year of my undergrad. Like I said, just a few days of arriving in Canada, and I was just like exploring the campus, walking around. And for me, where I grew up, normally when you're walking around the community, or even if you're not walking around your community, especially where there's elders or just general people on the streets, you say good morning, you say hi. So I was walking around campus, just getting a feel of my space, and everyone I see I would say good morning to, because it probably was like 9 o'clock in the morning, and I noticed that no one was answering me, no one was responding. It's like, okay. And then next day I walked around, do the same thing, and then I noticed no one's answering me, and I had a moment like, what is going on here? Is this my first? Is this racism? What is this? What is this discrimination? And then it took me about maybe my first year of being in Canada, in that, yeah, they don't actually do that. Like people, but I don't know. I thought they said Canadians were nice, so I guess that was my first instant with culture shock, where there are certain simple norms that you have when it comes to greeting people that you don't know, or just pleasantry, saying hi. That was something that really came as a culture shock to me, because it is something that I honestly still do by default, because when you spend like 20 something years of your life conditioned to do one particular thing, and then it's kind of hard to remove that from your life. So immediately for me, not having, it seems very trivial, but not having people respond when you say hi, good morning, was a bit of a culture shock for me, especially since they said Canadians are nice.
I'll tell you, I had the same experience. So I'm from Zimbabwe originally, and my first overseas experience was in the UK. And it's a very African way of being. Caribbean people, of course, we're of African descent. We carry
Yeah,
that in us. And you will never bump into another human being and not acknowledge that they're there.
exactly.
And I'm in London. I would greet people at the tube station, and people would look through me like I didn't exist. It was like, and I remember I used to cry and call my mother and tell her that I felt like I was disappearing, like
Mm-hmm.
nobody was seeing me. So, yeah, different cultures relate in such different ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Canadians are supposed to be the friendly ones.
Right?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so you're transitioning from public service into consultancy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a significant move. What inspired this shift? And how do you envisage blending your passion for immigration into your consultancy work?
Okay, so I guess to answer that question, I have to back up a bit. So when I first completed my undergrad, or even when I was in my undergrad, I did a lot of work with my university at Dalhousie. So I worked at the School of Continuing Education, where they work with ESL students. And I also worked at the International Center, mostly as a volunteer coordinator, which meant like developing peer mentor programs and essentially just supporting the social and academic transition of international students to the Canadian environment, to the Canadian culture. And a lot of that was a lot of peer mentorship, immigration advice here and there. So I spent a lot of time being consumed in this world. And even for my own transition from the Caribbean to Canada, I did all the immigration processes myself. And it was simply out of just reading the website, understanding what is needed, and just following the rules, the protocols, even to the point where I've practically done all the applications for my mom and my sister when they come visit me, or any friends who've been through like their permanent residence application. I'm the person that they come to advise because that's essentially just something I'm interested in. And then after that, I transitioned into more student affairs, where I work with not just international students, but students in general. And then I transitioned into doing EDIA work with the public service. And I felt like for me, it might seem, for other people, it might seem like I was leaping from one thing to the next, but that's always who I've been. In high school back in the Caribbean, I did several subjects from history, geography, architecture, science, languages. I was just always interested in doing everything and just continuously learning. So I felt whenever I was at a point where, okay, I'm at the pinnacle of what I think I can learn here, I want to experience something else. So that is how I jumped from one thing to the next. And being the public service, I felt like I'm doing public sector work, but my passion always lied in immigration. Because for me, especially going through those processes, I think people underestimate the emotional, the personal, financial toll that being an immigrant in someone else's country has on people. People often think that, oh, you're coming over for a better life, or people like the old stereotypes, oh, immigrants are coming to take their jobs. That's not true, first of all, but also just being someone where you are literally waiting for the federal government to make a decision on whether you can legally stay in the country or not, that takes a toll on a person. So I often think that these things are overlooked, and people just see it as the processes of you're just trying to be here. So for me, I want to help make the transition for people who would like to come to Canada specifically and have a better life here. And to me, that's important because a lot of times I've had friends who have been given terrible advice from individuals here. And these are people who are actually, let me just say, lawyers, but because they don't fully understand the immigration landscape and they don't understand all the implications that certain decisions can have on a person, they give you advice and it's not really at your best interest. And I feel like someone who has the immigrant experience, and reason why I'm transitioning to consultant is so that I can gain that experience working in the public service as a consultant. Then I want to become a certified immigration consultant and be able to blend both of those so I can assist individuals who want to come to Canada, who don't fully understand the processes, so I can actually support them, because I feel like for me, it's important for me to leverage my lived experiences and understand what I can go through, because I feel like when you have someone who have been through that process and understand every single aspect of it, that person is more invested in making sure that there is a positive outcome.
Oh, wow. You know, you're so right. It's a very emotionally draining experience. And when you're
Mhm.
sitting on that, not knowing whether you're staying or going and not having all the right information, I can really
Right.
see the pain point that you would be addressing as a consultant. So that's absolutely fantastic. So, with a master's in public administration under your belt, how has your academic background influenced your career path and the way you approach public service in consultancy?
I think for me, ultimately, the way I approach public service consultancy is essentially making sure that I'm having some type of impact, and hopefully a positive impact. As I said earlier in the intro, that a lot of times, like government services, especially when they are targeted for the marginalized and vulnerable populations, especially when these communities and these populations depend on these services, I think as public servants or people who work public sector adjacent, I think it's your responsibility to make sure that you are essentially putting your best foot forward. You're doing what you can to make sure these services are adequate for people who actually need them. So for me, it's always been that mentality. If for me, it's always been that mentality where if I'm in a position where the decisions that I make impacts a person's life, I want to make sure that I am making the best decision that I can make. So for a lot of my experiences that I've had, it's been a lot of project work, a lot of delivering services, and what I really loved about that work is the human aspect of it, where I get to go out and talk to people to understand what their needs are, what their pain points are, what their challenges are, and taking that information and see how we can interweave that into the services that we are offering people. A lot of times, services are developed without the user experience in mind, and I think that is often something that is not fully developed within the government, and something that the public sector, specifically consulting, does really well, is that they engage the people that these services are meant for. And that's the part that I really like. And that's the part that I think is critical to actually developing something and delivering something that people will actually use and will actually make a difference in their lives. So for me,
Mm.
I really approach this as the user experience at the forefront, because before we can do anything, we got to talk to the people to understand what they need.
Now, you've mentioned the importance of public service work for you, right? Can you share a standout project or an initiative that maybe you were involved with that
Mhm.
has truly made a difference in the community?
One of the project that I guess I would say I was responsible for developing and leading was when I worked with the public service here, and I would say the community within the department that I was working with, specifically because I was tasked with developing an employee wellness program. I don't know why they thought that I could I could develop and lead a wellness program, but I just say, like, I'm just happy that I had the support of my ED, my executive director, of the associate deputy minister, to trust in me to actually develop something department wide that serves over 800 employees.
Oh,
But
wow.
essentially, I was tasked with developing a department wide wellness program that would help employees prioritize their wellness. And for me, that was particularly important because as a public servant, you spend all day at your desk. You're lucky if you have a stand and sit desk so you can stand and sit throughout the day. Or
Mm.
sometimes your work day is so hectic you can't even go outside for a coffee break or fresh air. So for me, it was really important to deliver something that people can access while they work, that can
Right.
help them prioritize their wellness, that can help them adopt healthy habits. So a lot of that was bringing in guest speakers, whether we're talking about mobility, we're talking about nutrition. We had engaging activities where we encouraged people to, you know what, get up from your desk for 10 minutes twice a day. And of course, all those were incentivized by cool prizes. And then what else? I think for me, it was really important and really rewarding to see people really engage, see people show up to the guest speakers that we invited, to see people send submissions, send it, taking selfies of them out on a walk. So it was really rewarding to see that people are engaging and hopefully they are adopting healthy habits, because I've been there. I've been a public servant where your day, as much as you might work 9 to 5, your days are actually longer than that, and you might
Mm.
not have enough time for yourself. So I was happy that I can bring something to them while they're at work. And key for me, which is something that I actually really is a pet peeve for me, when employees have lunch and learns and then they schedule them during your lunch. So
Oh, yeah.
one thing I said I will never have a part of this program is to invite people to virtual sessions and then have them participate during their lunch.
Okay, yeah, that's it. Almost trivializes the whole exercise. That all we'll just do it during your lunch break. It's not that important. We don't want to take it out of your normal work time.
Right.
So, moving from the Caribbean to Canada for higher education is a bold step. Can you describe the initial challenges that you faced in adapting this new country and education system and how you overcame those challenges?
Hmm. I would say, well, immediately the first challenge was the weather. I've lived here for 9 years. I'm never going to get used to the weather, even to the point where I consider myself a hermit. Once it's winter, you will not have me going outside unless I absolutely have to. But other than that, I would say, I guess some of the challenges is that, right, I guess some of the challenges that I face in terms of the education system, I think were honestly very limited, because I had completed high school, and in the Caribbean, we have something that's called sixth form, which is like additional 2 years of tertiary education. So it's almost
Mhm.
like community college where you get a CAPE certificate. So I did that for
Right.
2 years, and then I also worked for another 2 to 3 years. So I came as someone who had already done like a community college. I had already worked outside. So when I came here, it was pretty easy for me to adapt here. And I also
Right.
feel like my education system, as much as sometimes when you are in the Caribbean and you're at school, you're wondering, what am I learning here? But it really prepared me for university. I was
Mm.
impressed. Like my first year, we had to complete first year writing courses, and my writing abilities was way above average and way beyond compared to other university students. So I actually think, well, of course there are gaps, like maybe I could have a more robust education in terms of mathematics or arithmetics or something along those lines, but I really do think that my education in the Caribbean really prepared me for the transition into university here. I really didn't face that many challenges, but it also could be because of my lived experiences as well. I've always been someone who was really dedicated to my education. I graduated magna cum laude at my sixth form. I was valedictorian of my high school. So education was something that I always took seriously. So it wasn't
Mm.
really a challenging transition for me, unfortunately. Well, fortunately.
Oh, that's good. And, so you obviously had the British system because in Zimbabwe we had the same
Yeah.
thing. We went up to sixth form, so that was really
Hmm.
good. You were kind of one up on all of your peers. So, as someone from St. Kitts and Nevis, how do you maintain and celebrate your Caribbean heritage while adapting to a new life in Canada? And are there any particular traditions or aspects of your culture that you hold close?
Yeah, the food. I always stick to the food. I try to cook as much Caribbean food as I can. I cook in Caribbean style. Of course, I still dabble here and there with the more North American, but
Mm.
traditionally, if I could cook Caribbean food, I would. I always love when my mom come visit me so she can cook me food as well. I will always retain the food aspect of my culture. That's never something that I will abandon.
Yes.
Also, I heavily have my accent still the Caribbean. I still speak in, I guess, what we call Caribbean patois. Another aspect is that I am embraced in the Caribbean diaspora here. In university, I was heavily involved with the Caribbean Society, served on the executive, was involved in their community, in their activities. And a lot of my friends here are still Caribbean natives. So just being involved in the Caribbean activities, the people, the food, maintaining my mother tongue, as I say, are the ways
Mm.
that I hold on to my culture. I am, as much as when I grew up, I couldn't, being growing up on a small island of 68 square miles, it felt restricting to me. But
Right.
my Caribbean culture is something that I am 100% proud of. And that's something that I will never abandon because it really, really shaped who I am and how
Wow.
I'm able to navigate life as a Black person, as a Black woman here in Canada.
I love it. It is good to hold on to our heritage.
Hmm.
So, in your journey, how have you navigated the complexities of being a person of color and an immigrant in Canada? And
Mm,
what advice would you give to others embarking on a similar path?
mm. I think for me, that has a lot to do. It might seem a bit counterproductive, but a lot of it has to do with cultural sensitivity training. And I say that because it was important for me to understand what's being taught here as cultural sensitivity. And also because the fact that I grew up in the Caribbean, I grew up with one particular culture. So it was important for me to be able to navigate the system, to understand and to develop that kind of cultural competency beyond my own and beyond my lived experience. So whenever I get an opportunity to do so, I take part in, I guess, culture competency training. I took the opportunity to embrace with people from other cultural backgrounds. So for me, that was really, really critical because as someone from the Caribbean, I know I show up in the world different. I show up in the world differently I'm for even as something as simple as communication style, I'm more of a direct speaker. And one of the things I noticed when I came to Canada, a lot of people don't speak directly. So that is something that I had to really acknowledge. And a lot of times for me to effectively communicate with people, I've had to learn to really, take a step back, let them have the floor, let them talk. And then oftentimes it's a lot of me just like, so what I'm hearing here is that you're saying this and this and that. And it's also like a lot of times you have to ask a lot of questions just to get the point out of them because I'm a
Yes.
direct speaker. And a lot of people aren't comfortable with that. And that often comes off as someone being confident. That's not something I never realized about myself before, but apparently I've been told this and I can't help it. But I feel like just being aware of how I show up in the world and how I show up in the world is often influenced by the background that I grew up in, my culture, and
Mm.
just understanding that not everyone is used to how Caribbean people navigate, and just being aware of that, being able to take a step back, have a little bit of humility, don't take things too personal, and just give us one of the things I learned here from Canada is grace. Give people grace. And
That's
that is something that I
wonderful.
actively work on, giving people grace.
So now you've experienced life in the Caribbean and in Canada. From your perspective, how do these two distinct cultures approach diversity and inclusion, and what can they learn from each other?
I would honestly say that unfortunately, Canada, well, unfortunately, my country is not as far as ahead in terms of diversity and inclusion because the majority, of course, there are people from other cultural backgrounds and other races within my country, but in the true sense of diversity and inclusion, there that is really lacking. So while Canada is not perfect, and it does make the effort to, I guess, advance diversity and inclusion, whether it's the public sector, private sector, or whether you're at university, there are efforts being made to make people feel welcome, make people feel like they belong. Of course, it's not always going to be perfect, but I do feel that oftentimes when you're looking at a country that is made up of, I guess, 100% Black, well, not 100%, but let's say 80% Black people, we often think
Yes.
that, oh, we don't need to learn anything about diversity and inclusion. And that
Mm.
is where we go wrong. So I do think my country and a lot of countries that have that mentality, there is a lot to be learned from other countries who are more diverse in terms of different ethnic, different cultural backgrounds, such as Canada. There are
Yeah.
things that could be learned. Like, for example, I never knew about things like microaggressions until I was in Canada. And then just reflecting on that, like, oh, yeah, I've experienced that not only here, but also in my own country. So there are elements that could be learned from, especially from countries, like I said, that are predominantly Black countries, because we
Yeah.
feel like, oh, we don't need to learn about diversity and inclusion. We know to do that.
But what I do see, though, with regards to inclusion in terms of African countries or countries with people of African descent, is we are very welcoming of
Oh, we
outsiders.
definitely are.
You know, you will see somebody who doesn't look like you will make an effort to greet them, to speak to them, which is why if you were in Canada or the UK or in some of these other Western countries. So I think in that sense, we are more inclusive of
Mhm,
outsiders. We are less suspicious and curious. So people's curiosity would draw them in to find out where you're from,
mhm.
how you came, what you're doing. So that's one of the things that I miss about home myself.
Yeah,
So,
because, oh, go ahead.
mhm. No, no, finish off.
No, I was going to say because, sometimes I feel like there's always that question when you're asked, oh, where are you from? Like, why
Hmm.
are you asking me where I'm from? So that question kind of hits differently when you're being asked it here or
Yeah.
when you're being asked in a different country of a different cultural or racial makeup.
Yeah, I'm a New Zealand citizen. I've been in New Zealand for 22 years. I've only moved to Australia 3 years ago. And in the 22 years of my stay in New Zealand, there isn't a day that went by when somebody didn't ask me where I was from.
Oh, mm-hmm,
22 years. And it got to a point where it's really irritating.
mm-hmm,
But then I had to kind of look at it from their perspective and say, okay, they're just curious.
right.
But because you stand out, we can't run away from this chocolate brown skin. You're going to stick
Mm-hmm,
out like a sore thumb wherever
mm-hmm,
you go. So, yeah, that is just the challenge of being brown, I guess.
I guess.
Okay, so let me move on to my next question. Throughout your education and career, mentorship can play a crucial role. Have you had mentors who significantly impacted your journey?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you plan to pay it forwards?
Okay, so I've definitely had mentors throughout my journey. I think for every professional experience I've had, I've always had mentors, whether officially or unofficially, that really
Mhm.
supported me, or people who I can go to for advice, even when I don't particularly work in that establishment anymore. Those are people that I still stay in contact with. Those are people
Mhm.
who I can call up. Like, if I just need advice, I can quickly give them a call and they can give me the support I need. And I understood how valuable it is to have that support, to
Yeah.
have someone in your court to support you, because you can't do it alone. You often need advice. And for me, I want to pay that forward in any way I can, because for me, I benefited from that. So I think it's important for me to help others navigate. And I offer my assistance in any way I can. Like, for example, I worked in the public service, and there's someone who works in the department I never met before. They were interested in the program that I'm in. My old department reached out to me, so I said if I'm willing to talk to that person, sure. Like, that is nothing for me to do that. If someone wants some advice, I had a conversation with them. I told them, feel free to reach out. We exchange emails. I'm happy to help you out in any way. Another
Mhm.
example, I was at a International Women's Day event last month, and there was a young lady who had just, I think she was maybe been in Canada for a couple of months, and we got to talk, and I'm like, I told her, been there, I understand you're trying to figure things out. We exchanged numbers, told her to reach out to me anytime you want to connect. I feel
Mhm.
like sometimes, as long as you offer that support to people, let people know you can reach out to you. You don't need an
Yeah.
official thing. You don't need to sign a contract to say, okay, you're my mentor, I'm the mentee. Just as long as you I think, create a safe space where people feel comfortable enough to come and talk to you, and you're
Mhm.
always willing to listen, and you offer your time and your effort to someone.
It makes a big difference.
Hmm.
So, looking towards the future, what are some key areas within public health consultancy that you're passionate about exploring further, besides immigration?
Hmm. I feel like, in terms of public consultancy, in I don't really have a particular specialization other than immigration. I know immigration is where I'll end up, whether it's 5 years from now, but
Mhm.
between now and then, I want to get as much experience, whether it's with housing, social affairs, community development, healthcare. For
Yeah.
me, like I said, I never was that type of person that I know that this is what I want specifically. I think there is value in being well rounded, in obtaining knowledge, to constantly be learning. So,
Mm.
and not honestly, in any project that I can offer my assistance and I can support, I will.
Mm. That's awesome. So, lastly, for our listeners who may be considering a similar transition from a traditional role in public service to a more dynamic consultancy role, what key pieces of advice would you share to help them navigate this change?
I would say one of the things that you definitely want to do is, if you are interested in consulting, I would say maybe try to reach out to anyone that, utilize your LinkedIn to see if you can find anyone that's particularly working in any of the, whether it's a big four or it's a small firm, a small boutique firm. See if you can reach out to someone to have like an informational interview where you can ask them questions about consulting, ask them how they got to that point and what are some of the steps that they took, or advice.
Mhm.
Start small just to see if that's the right fit for you. And then
Yes.
from that conversation, if it's something that you want to actually pursue, there are a lot of opportunities with a lot of the big fours to like do internships, or not even just big fours, a lot of consulting firms to do like internships, see if you can
Mhm.
pursue those. It's a good opportunity to get a feel for it without having like a full commitment, like you're a permanent full-time hire. And then
Yes.
you can go from there. I did my MPA, particularly not with the idea that I was going to end up in consulting. Speaking frankly, I never even considered consulting even before I started my MPA. It's
Mhm.
through my MPA that that door opened for me, and I had my aha moment that, you know what, this is where I'm going to go. Oftentimes, when I tell this story, it's interesting to people that I started off in the public service, and then I pursued my degree, and now I'm not going back into the public service. My degree, which is supposed to prepare me to be like a future public servant in some ways led me out of public service. But sometimes like certain degrees like an MBA or MPA, that is also an option. Of course, they are big ticket items because education is not free. But with those three opportunities, maybe considering further education where you can develop the leadership management skills that will definitely be beneficial for you in consulting. Reach out to someone on LinkedIn who currently is working in consultant, or maybe they're not working right now, but they did in the past, or try your hand at trying to get one of those internships to get a feel for it. Those would be my top three.
I love it. Now, how can people get hold of you? You're offering this amazing service. Where is the best place for people to find you?
Best place to find me would be my LinkedIn, my name. So my LinkedIn is my name, Chloe Doras. So that is the best place to reach out to me.
That is fantastic. And I'm pretty sure the work you're doing now is going to help a lot of people who are wanting to transition. I'll just put your LinkedIn profile link in the display there so people can see it. But thank you so much for coming online and sharing your story with us today.
And thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
And thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. The Diversity Connector is a platform that brings you stories and voices of people from all over the world, celebrating and sharing our stories around diversity and inclusion. So tune in again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and bye for now. Thanks again, Chloe.
Thank you, mate.
And that's a wrap, everybody, on today's episode of the Diversity Connector podcast. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our vibrant and global conversation. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a tapestry of diverse perspectives. Remember, every story you've heard today is a thread in the larger fabric of our shared humanity. So, as you step back into your world, carry these stories with you and let them inspire you to embrace and celebrate the rich diversity around us. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these inspiring stories with more listeners. Do follow us on social media by looking for the Diversity Connector podcast for more updates. Until then, keep connecting, keep listening, and keep celebrating the beauty of diversity. This is the Diversity Connector podcast signing off. Stay curious, stay open, and definitely stay connected.